All right, MLS Stat just came out, which always has me wanting to jump right into video mode to share some of the things we're learning. Now, most of Stat, so MLS Stat, if this is your first time watching one of these videos, is kind of a recap that MLS puts out telling us kind of what's going on in the market. So it's a really great economic perspective on what's going on in real estate, with some fantastic commentary by great economists. So the stat was not that exciting because it's basically unchanged compared to some of the more recent months. Prices have stayed very stable, which is great. So we saw a tremendous increase the first 6 months of the year, and we've seen a lot more continuity since then. Now, some of the pending data that they have suggests that we're about to see a little bit of a price jump, which will be interesting to see how that pans out. But in general, not a ton of exciting data, but there is something that's happened recently I do want to chat about, because it was chatted on in Stat, but B, I've been getting a lot of people asking me about it recently, and that is the recent moratorium being uplifted on both foreclosures and evictions. So take a step back. When I talk about the moratorium on foreclosures, if you've been living under a rock, or maybe you just didn't know because it wasn't relevant to you, there has been a moratorium on foreclosures as a result of COVID. So essentially what homeowners could do since last, probably April or May, is put their house into forbearance, which meant no mortgage payments were due at that period of time. And depending on what they had negotiated or the programs that their lender offered, either that money was due when they came back, those months were tacked onto the end. There was lots of different options depending on why people were taking the forbearance. So there's been about 7 million people who were in some form of forbearance across the US up until July 31st when the moratorium was lifted. So that's thing number one. Thing number two, the foreclosure or evictions. So there was also a moratorium on evicting tenants who, in whatever capacity, and there's lots of legalities I won't get into, but because of COVID weren't able to make their rent payments. Now those two things together are really interesting, right? Because if you are a homeowner who has a rental property with a tenant in place and is not paying rent because of COVID, you can't ask them to leave because of the moratorium, and maybe you can't make your mortgage payment because you're not making any money, so perhaps you went into forbearance. So that could be one type of homeowner. There were a lot of people who went into forbearance, frankly, to protect their assets and hold on to as much cash as they could in case they lost their job, realized they weren't losing their job, went back, paid their mortgage in full, good to go there. So we've got lots of different scenarios going on here, but this is what the two of those put together mean. There was a lot of speculation around if we would see a surge of inventory once those two were lifted. The concept was over here, there were homeowners who weren't able to make their back payments and as a result would need to lose their house to foreclosure. And over here, because now there's going to be all these vacancies, there was curiosity around if there'd be an issue refilling the spot, blah, blah, blah. Here's the short version of the story. It's highly unlikely we will see a surge of inventory. Now, we are expecting an increase. It's, of course, people didn't get by completely unscathed, but even a increase in foreclosed homes would not even pale in comparison to actually what average is. So if you're like me, maybe you didn't know, well, I know now and I have for years, but pre-real estate me had no idea that foreclosures were actually very normal. They weren't just a thing when the market crashed. Foreclosures were very real. They just weren't common. Now, when the market crashed, foreclosures and the newly invented short sales became, frankly, average. So the reason these properties aren't going into foreclosure is these homeowners have much more money in their house than even before COVID started. For example, the median price point in the Valley prior to COVID was $300,000. And as of today, it's just over $400,000. So even if someone didn't make a payment on their house for the last 18 months, their house is now worth $100,000 more as a median. So even if you take into account all of the back payments and late fees or whatever's going to get assessed to them, they still are sitting on a pile of money. Why would you foreclose your house and not make a dime off of it when you could just sell it, make some money and move on, even if you can't pay your back payments? So the foreclosures won't be a really big thing. So then over here, what we're seeing is as these people are being evicted from their properties, which there's all kinds of different things, but in the state of Arizona, as people continue to be evicted from the properties, we're going to see a huge surgence of people who are now needing to find new rental properties. So that vacancy rate we thought we were going to see is going to look different. And if you're a renter, you already know rental prices have been increasing dramatically over the last year and a half. And so those homeowners who now have a vacant property are going to be kind of excited because now they can increase their rent dramatically. So all of that to say, if you were one of the people who are hoping for a surge of inventory directly related to the forbearance and eviction moratorium, this is not good news for you. It should be business as usual. But if you're a real estate owner in Arizona, you should also be very grateful because that means your property is not going to be compared to distressed properties on the market. And everyone is sitting on a pile of money known as home equity. So I hope this clears up any questions you might have around the mortgage forbearance and now the lift on evictions. But if there are any future questions or any other nuggets that have popped up, please let me know. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.